Before we get started, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so that you don't miss any of the content that is released by GoCollect. And if you're interested, head over to Regie Collects here on YouTube. Regie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector and the host of the GoCollect speculation video, and I want to welcome you to another episode. In this episode, we are going to spend some time talking about 6 blog posts that have been sent in to GoCollect. With that said, let's talk about the very first blog post. And this first blog post is an interesting one to me because it touches on something that I talk about on my channel often. And it is the idea that comics are an alternative form of investment. And like many other types of investments, it is wise to try to diversify what you are investing in. The blogger actually takes a slightly different approach in that the blogger says, yes, you can diversify in the types of books that you are buying if you're into comics, but one of the other ways that you might be able to diversify is by picking up books that have multiple first appearances, multiple shots on goal, multiple things actually going for it. And over the course of this blog post, the blogger talks about several different Marvel and DC comics that have a lot going for them. And so if you buy into this principle of diversification through multiple appearances, this is a blog post that you want to check out. With that said, let's talk about a couple of the books that the blogger mentions. The very first book that our blogger talks about is Uncanny X-Men issue number 129. This book is the first appearance of Kitty Pryde, and if you happen to be reading the current X-Men series, you probably know that she's going by the name Kate right now. In addition to being Kitty's first appearance, this book is also the first appearance of Emma Frost, another incredibly powerful mutant that has been both a good guy and a bad guy, and at present is a little in between given that she's on the council on the island of Krakoa. But in addition to that, this book is also the cameo appearance of the Hellfire Club. The blogger makes the point that this book has several different things going for it, and with the X-Men yet to appear in the MCU, this potentially is a good way to go because, again, there are several different shots on goal that are being had with this one book. The very next book that the blogger talks about is another Marvel book, specifically Iron Man issue number 55. And this is a book, like the previous, that I actually have in my collection. Now, what makes this book really noteworthy, of course, is that it is the first appearance of Thanos, who was the central character in the recent Avengers movie, everybody's favorite bad guy. But in addition to that, this book has some other things that are going forward that have to be mentioned, because even if Thanos isn't front and center moving forward in the MCU, there are some other characters that have some appearances that might catch fire with the movies that have yet to come out. Specifically, the blogger calls our attention to the fact that this is the first appearance of Kronos. And Kronos is actually the leader of the Eternals. And many of you probably know that there is an Eternals movie in the works. And depending upon which way this movie goes, Kronos could play a popular role. Kronos is also the grandfather of Thanos. In addition to Kronos and Thanos appearing in this book, we also have Mentor, who is the father of Thanos, and Star Fox, who is Thanos' brother. As if that weren't enough, we also have some other first appearances, specifically from Drax the Destroyer, who is currently in the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And if that weren't enough, we also have the Blood Brothers. Now, I will tell you that the Blood Brothers is probably a little bit of a long shot, but there's a lot of other good things that are going on in this book. And so if you have an opportunity to pick this one up, there could be some magic that gets made here. And again, this book may be cooling off because of Thanos, but there are some other things here that have some potential. The very last book that I'm going to talk about that the blogger mentions is a DC book, and we are specifically talking about DC Comics Presents issue number 26. And this book is the first team appearance of the Teen Titans. And if you are not watching the Teen Titans show on HBO Max, I want to encourage you to treat yourself. This series is fantastic. It is fantastic. And again, this is the first appearance of this really awesome team that is currently being portrayed on the small screen. But in addition to that, it is also the first appearance of several of the Teen Titans, specifically of Cyborg, Starfire, and Raven. And this book has some couple of other things going on, like a really cool cover, but it doesn't matter whether you are a DC person or a Marvel person. There are a couple of books, again, that are mentioned in this blog post that you may want to check out. Our next blogger took some time to look at the Silver Age hot list that is on the GoCollect website and noticed something interesting about several of the books. And what the blogger noticed is that 4 out of the 10 books are actually associated with the Fantastic Four. And in the course of this blog post, the blogger asks a pretty interesting question that I'll pose to you right now. And I'll be looking for your comments down in the comment section. But the question is, do these 4 books have long-term potential in your mind? The very first book that the blogger talks about is a book that has a really awesome first appearance, and that is Fantastic Four issue number 52, and this is the first appearance of the Black Panther. The next book that the blogger talks about also has a first appearance as well, specifically Fantastic Four issue number 67, and this book is actually on the list because it is the first cameo appearance of him, also known as Adam Warlock. And this book too has had a few periods of being hot and then cooling off and then heating up again because people believe that Adam Warlock is going to appear in the MCU at some point. The last 2 books that the blogger made note of that were on the list are in many ways very much connected, and they also have some first appearances. I'll be looking for your comments down in the comment section, and if you want to spend some additional time reading into the rationale that the blogger puts forth, you may want to click on the link that is down in the description so that you can read this blog post in its entirety. So as of the last few weeks, there has been a tremendous amount of controversy around the Punisher. And there are calls for Marvel to actually retire the Punisher character and the Punisher logo. And just speaking for myself, as Regie Collects, I am hoping that Marvel does not do that. I am hoping that they do not cave to peer pressure and actually do away with an incredibly fantastic character. Now, with that said, our blogger doesn't talk about any of that. Our blogger instead takes some time to talk about one of the Punisher's greatest enemies. And we are specifically talking about Jigsaw. And we actually saw Jigsaw on the small screen opposite of the Punisher in the Netflix series. But like everything that is comics related, things that go one way can certainly go another way, and just because he died in the Netflix series doesn't mean that he has to stay dead, especially if they decide to bring the Punisher into the MCU on the small screen or the big screen. They could certainly bring back Jigsaw, who arguably is the quintessential villain opposite of the Punisher. And if you believe that there is some magic here, you might want to take a look at Jigsaw's first appearance. Jigsaw's first appearance was in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 162. 2 years ago, at the height of the whole Netflix Punisher Jigsaw thing, this book at a 9.8 was selling for $700. But since the series has been canceled, that same book is now selling, according to GoCollect, at roughly $375. So here's the thing, because characters in comics don't stay dead forever, and because Jigsaw is, again, potentially, arguably, the greatest Punisher villain that there is besides Wilson Fisk, there is a possibility that this character could come back. And if that happens, this book at $375 might be a cheap buy. The link to this blog post is down in the description. I encourage you to click on it, read this blog post, and figure out whether this is a character that you want to speculate on. The current rumor right now is that a version of Batgirl is going to appear in the the Titan show on HBO Max, and then will segue into having her own movie. But the question is, which version of Batgirl will appear? Our next blogger took some time to highlight not every single Batgirl, but the 3 leading candidates that have the greatest potential. And to be honest, there's really one that most people think will make the appearance. But with that said, let's talk about the other 2 very quickly. The very first candidate that is mentioned is Betty Kane, and Betty actually donned the costume of Batgirl in the early 60s and appeared in Batman issue number 139. The next candidate that is mentioned is Stephanie Brown, and Stephanie actually became the new Batgirl in Batgirl issue number 1, but also was a Robin for a period and appeared in Robin issue number 126. As I mentioned, we were going to talk about those first 2 very briefly. So there you go. The lead candidate that a lot of people believe is going to be the one that's actually going to appear is Barbara Gordon. And Barbara Gordon is the daughter of Commissioner Gordon and a long-term confidant and buddy of Batman. So this one actually makes a whole lot of sense. But Barbara had her first appearance in Detective Comics issue number 359. And my fingers are crossed that Barbara actually appears. Her first appearance, honestly, is one of my favorite DC covers. I genuinely love this cover. I do not own this book, but I would like to own it at some point. But fingers crossed that Barbara actually does appear, because I think that if done right, this character will fit in very nicely with the Titans team that is currently assembled for this show. And ultimately, again, if she gets her own movie, I think that would be incredible. This blog post, like the others, is linked down in the description. Please check it out. Our next blogger takes some time to talk about some Blue Ocean books that you may want to investigate. Blue Ocean books, if you are not familiar with the term, is a concept of books that are undervalued, unappreciated, books that people aren't really paying attention to right now because they're chasing after the hot books. They're chasing after those books that are essentially in the red ocean. And our blogger in this blog post takes some time to look at 5 different Blue Ocean books that you may want to investigate. The very first book is one that is associated with Wolverine, arguably one of Marvel's greatest characters, and a character that people are super excited about seeing in the MCU whenever that happens. And everyone knows that Wolverine has a couple of super powerful arch enemies, if you will, and one of them is Sabretooth. The other is Omega Red. And Omega Red had his first appearance in X-Men issue number 4. This is a book that has been hot and cooled off, and again, may have some long-term potential. The next character that our blogger talks about is War Machine. And this one is a little bit of a bouncing ball, so hopefully you guys will be able to follow this. But War Machine first appeared on the cover of Iron Man issue number 282. But that is actually not the first appearance of the War Machine armor, which is also known as Iron Man Armor Model 11. The armor itself actually appeared in Iron Man issue number 281. Now here's the thing. Rhodey actually did not wear the armor until Iron Man issue number 284. And the code name War Machine wasn't even used until West Coast Avengers issue number 94. A little bit of a bouncing ball. Now what makes this interesting is that Kevin Feige recently made mention of a show called Armor Wars. Now if this show happens, and there is no one doubting that it will, that leaves the possibility that the books that are associated with the War Machine armor could potentially rise in value. If you believe in this possibility, these are books that you may want to check out. The very last book that I'm going to talk about, and technically the very last character that I'm going to talk about, is Bane. And Bane is a bad boy. I mean, he broke Batman's back and he also killed Alfred. And Alfred's kind of sort of back. At least I think he's back. Maybe. But anyway, Bane is a bad boy. And with the resurgence in interest right now in the Batman franchise, many people believe that potentially Bane will actually come back into a movie or something like that. Now, with that said, because he could come back, you may want to check out his first appearance. Bane's first appearance in Batman Vengeance of Bane issue number 1 at a 9.8 is selling for roughly $350, which is a nice chunk of change. But if you take a step back and go with a 9.6, you can actually pick up a graded copy of his first appearance for about $160. Our blogger went a step further and actually checked out some prices on eBay and actually found that you can get some graded comics a lot less expensively than the current FMVs that are being seen on GoCollect. The takeaway here is that if you believe that there is some magic to be made with Bane, you may want to look around and not necessarily jump at the first book that presents itself, because there are some buying opportunities out there. The blogger goes on to talk about a few other books that we are not going to talk about in this episode, but you can actually check them out. This blog post is linked down in the description. Our next blogger has a little bit of fun with this last blog post, in that they are posing the question as to what you can buy if you happen to own and sold your copy of Amazing Fantasy 15 at a 9.4. And if you're curious what you could actually buy, wonder no more, because our blogger actually highlights two things that you could buy. You could own a single family home in Hawaii, or if you're more of a car person, you could actually buy the 33rd most expensive car in the world, that being a Maserati MC12. And I'll be honest with you, I have no clue what a Maserati MC12 actually looks like, and will be Googling it in a few minutes, because now I am curious why this car is so expensive. But what I will tell you is that if you were to buy this car with the proceeds from your AF15 9.4, you would actually have some money left over. That's how much money a copy of Amazing Fantasy 15 goes for. Again, the blogger's having a little bit of fun, but actually does do a solid job of highlighting why Amazing Fantasy is such a really cool book to own. And they talk about the fact that this book is the start of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, a character that has lots of flaws, a character that a lot of people can understand, because he's not perfect, and because he makes mistakes, and because he struggles with just being a regular person. Now, I think that there may be some movement, some positive and negative movement within a year, but generally speaking, this book does well year after year and illustrates why comics are a great form of investment. If you are curious about amazing fantasy, and again, what you might be able to buy if you own a 9.4 of this book, this blog post is linked down in the description for you. So there you have it. We have reached the end of another episode. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I certainly want to encourage you to tune in next week when we get to do this all over again.